Georgia's loaded. Where have you heard this before? MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, breaking down the Dogs. We've got Palmer Toms on the line from Dogs 247 with spring practice just about 3 weeks away. And Palmer's in to get us all set up with personnel that is very, very impressive and experienced. Palmer, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Like you said, this is a very talented and experienced Georgia roster that we're going to be breaking down. A lot of guys returning on offense, and that was, something that looked like a strength for the Bulldogs down the stretch. So excited to break it down with you today.
We talk college football here every day, so please like the video, share it on social media, and subscribe. We go live every day, typically multiple times per day. Hit that bell for the notifications. That way you know when we're going live. JT Daniels threw over 100 passes, so everybody got a pretty good sample of his abilities, and especially in the bowl game against Cincinnati, in which they came back in the fourth quarter to get the job done. Your thoughts about JT Daniels and whether he met the expectations of, who knows about players and coaches, but at least the fan base?
Yeah, I think, when given what Georgia had at quarterback early on in the season, expectations were pretty low, and it didn't take much for Daniels to surpass what Georgia had at the position. You look at his first game, threw for 401 yards against Mississippi State, 4 touchdowns. Was a big night in Sanford Stadium. The Bulldogs brought out the black uniforms. Everyone was super excited about that. And it was quite the debut for the redshirt sophomore. I think looking at going into this next season, it's going to be huge that he's got this second season under the same offensive coordinator, Todd Monken, a lot more familiarity with the system, a lot of comfort with these wide receivers that we're going to talk about. All the pieces are there for Georgia to have a great offense, the experience, the depth, and it all starts with JT Daniels.
How does you know what? I'm going to cut it right there because I'm going to stay with JT Daniels here. I'm not going to cut to the second stringer. So was there anything noticeable in him completing 67% of his passes, 10 touchdowns, 2 picks, that in addition to just being comfortable with the offense and working with his wide receivers for a full other offseason and into another season, that there would be a marked level of improvement that needs to take place? Anything that stands out to you in regards to his game?
Yeah, I think if you look at Daniels and his mechanics, they weren't great, especially on some of the deep balls. His lower body is not. He's got all the arm talent in the world, but he doesn't have great lower body mechanics. And I think part of that is, him being. You look at his college career. He played his first season at USC, but really should have been a high school senior that year. Then had a knee injury that kept him out for a whole season, and really a season and a half when you look at how his first year at Georgia transpired. I think that's an area where it can be improved for him. And I think, working with, like we said, working with Todd Monken for a second offseason, Buster Faulkner, who's a, quarterback guru himself, is an offensive analyst for the Georgia. They've got a lot that they can work with. And like I said, the arm talent is there. You saw it on the deep balls. But, ideally, I think for Georgia fans, they would like to see him put those more on a line than a lob, if that makes sense.
Got Palmer Thomas on the line from Dogs 247 Sports to break down Georgia football, heading towards spring practice on March 16th with the spring game on April 17th. So considering we saw plenty of Stetson Bennett last year as he took over in the second quarter of game 1 and played about 3 or 4 games after that, how does the job set up for the backup role?
Yeah, that's definitely going to be interesting to watch, because you look at what Georgia has in Stetson Bennett. They've got an experienced guy there, has 8 games under his belt, 3 or 4, 8 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, over 1,000 yards. He's been in this system and around these Georgia coaches for a long, long time, dating back to his time as a walk-on when he ran scout team for the 2017 team, sat behind Jake Fromm, then was kind of the guy this past season. Maybe wasn't intended to be the starting quarterback, but, filled that role for the majority of the season for Georgia. and, led the Bulldogs to some big wins over Auburn, Tennessee. Obviously they had the losses to Alabama and Florida, but Stetson was the starting quarterback there and, has been through those battles. That's going to be interesting to see how they handled that, especially given the fact that they've got 5-star quarterback Brock Vandegrift coming in as a true freshman. He's in Athens now. He's from Athens, so it didn't take much to get him here, but he is going to be with the team this spring. He is an early enrollee, and, Vandegrift is a guy that has a lot of talent but he's a dual threat quarterback. He's a bigger guy than Stetson. Stetson, is comes in at 5'11", 190. Brock is bigger than that, listed at 6'3", 205. He's got the arm talent that he can, he threw for, big numbers in high school. He also can run the ball too. He did bang up his knee a little bit during his high school season, played through it. I don't believe he's getting surgery on it. And so that's going to be something to watch. It's not a major injury, but it's definitely something that Georgia fans are going to want to keep an eye on when Vandegrift tucks the ball and runs.
Palmer Tom's Dogs 247 Sports, Georgia football, of course, they'll be in the mix for an SEC championship and probably more because, my goodness, this roster is stacked. And they look at the running back room, and it's just more of the same, what we see every year. But I'm seeing names in Samir White, Kenny McIntosh, James Cook on down the line that are not only super talented, but they've been on campus, been in the system for now an extended period of time. So they could really flourish here after having some decent seasons this past year.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this past season, Samir White and James Cook were, and Kenny McIntosh, for a matter of fact, too, they were really stepping into bigger roles, taking over, and filling the shoes of DeAndre Swift and Brian Herrien, two guys that, kind of handled the running back duties for Georgia the last couple of seasons leading up to 2020. And, White, obviously, incredibly talented, number one running back in his class when he signed in 2018. James Cook was a top 5 running back in that class too. And both of them kind of started off their college careers slowly. Obviously with White, he tore his ACL his freshman season, missed all of that, and then, was behind several talented backs in 2019. James Cook was kind of used as more of a utility guy, had big numbers receiving, big numbers rushing, and it was kind of a game for these Georgia offensive coordinators of the last couple of seasons to figure out how they were going to use James Cook. You look back at the 2018 season with Jim Chaney as the offensive coordinator. Cook was a freshman. He got utilized a little bit, but not nearly as much as he has under Todd Monken this past season. Same thing with James Coley in 2019. There was a lot of talk that they were going to use the backs out of the backfield a lot more often in the passing game, and it didn't really transpire that way. So, I think you look at James Cook and the production that he had this past season, had 303 yards rushing and also put up some big numbers in the passing game, finishing with 225 yards there. Had a 100-yard game against Alabama in the receiving game. Had another 100-yard game. Believe it was against Kentucky rushing, but I would have to go back and check on that one. So, he got a lot more comfortable under Todd Monken as the offensive coordinator. And then, like you mentioned, down on the line, Kenny McIntosh, Dejean Edwards, Kendall Milton. There's a lot of talent there. And you bring in another talented guy out of IMG, Lavassier Carroll. The guy that I would watch would be Kendall Milton. He was a true freshman this past year, got banged up towards the end of the season against Florida and missed some time, ended up returning for the bowl game. But, obviously was not 100%. He's a guy that reminds me a lot of, maybe Nick Chubb, looking back at some of these Georgia running backs of the past. He runs really, really hard. And another guy that runs really, really hard is Dejean Edwards, who was also a true freshman this past year. Got some carries in some of the later games, looking back at the South Carolina and the Missouri games where Georgia, handedly won those. He got some carries, especially with Milton banged up, and they didn't really want to give a ton of reps to their top guys in White, Cook, and McIntosh. He's a guy that I would watch. And then, I bring up McIntosh there. He really did it all for Georgia. He had some big returns in the return game, showed some ability that he could break some runs. He's another guy that I would watch, that could have a breakout season in his third year with the program. I guess the overall narrative for this running back room would be, like you said, they're talented, they're experienced, and they're dynamic.
Samir White definitely leads the pack, at least based on what happened last year with 11 touchdowns, 800 yards practically on the ground. And the other guys had not a whole lot of wear and tear between Milton, Cook, and McIntosh between 35 and 47 carries. So they've got a lot of tread on the tires to go. No question about that. I will say the one thing, Palmer, that stands out to me in comparison to these guys statistically compared to all the great line of running backs that we've had in this system, especially since about 2011, 2012, would be their yards per carry. They're good. They're good yards per carry. If you pull that stat sheet up for just about any team in America, at most of those guys at about 5.5 yards per carry. But the Sony Michels and DeAndre Swifts of the world and Nick Chubb and on down the line, man, we saw 7.5 yards per carry. And I think that's got to be the combination of obviously their skill and ability being even at another level possibly, and also their ability to read blocks and pick the right holes and do all those things, but also the offensive line. And we'll get into the guys up front here and how the offensive line stacks up versus what we've seen in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you look at, the like you said, the yards per carry weren't great for those running backs, and I think that was really hurt by two poor games against Cincinnati and Mississippi State. Coincidentally, those were two of JT Daniels' bigger games, and Georgia was still able to win those, with Daniels throwing for 401 and 392 against Mississippi State and Cincinnati, respectively. But, you look at the game, the performance of the running game, they had 8 yards against Mississippi State and just 45 against Cincinnati. Obviously, that factors in sacks as well. Daniels lost 20 yards on sacks in the bowl game. But, those were not great performances. And I, like you said, I think that was, indicative of, maybe some poor play of the offensive line in those games.
So when you run down the starters up front, or who we know are coming back as starters versus who are vying for the other positions and who's been lost, this is the one unit on the offense that has not a whole lot of doubt, but at least some guys to replace.
Yeah, they lose Trey Hill at center and Ben Cleveland at right guard. Those are the two big losses on the offensive line. And really, when you look at the offense in general, those are the two big losses, overall. They lose a tight end and Trey McKitty, but outside of that, they don't lose any receiving threats, rushing threats, and they don't lose anything at the quarterback position outside of Dwan Mathis transferring and a couple of transfers down on the line on the depth chart at wide receiver. But, in terms of guys that played, this is the position group that loses the most, with Hill and Cleveland out, headed to the NFL. 3 years of Trey Hill starting. He got some great experience at right guard his freshman season. Started down the stretch there, started the SEC championship game against Alabama that season, the bowl game against Texas, came in and actually was a replacement for Ben Cleveland, who was originally the starting right guard that season. And he ended up, breaking his leg and losing out on time to Cade Mays, who then got hurt, and that opened the door for Hill. Hill bumped over to center and had some issues at center. In terms of pass protection and run blocking, he was great. But one thing that stood out there was, he struggled with shotgun snaps at times. I think the big one that most Georgia fans would remember would be against Tennessee, the snap that went over Stetson Bennett's head and resulted in, a Tennessee touchdown to start that game. And the Bulldogs were down 7-0 early on. Replacing those guys, it's going to be a challenge considering the experience that they have. I mentioned it all there with Hill. Cleveland's experience dates all the way back to that 2017 run through the SEC championship to the national championship game where they fell to Alabama. In terms of what they've got returning, Jamari Salyer is the key guy for me. And he's a guy that could started every game at left tackle this past season. Well, take that back. He started every game up until the bowl game at left tackle, and before he was bumped inside to left guard. That's probably the position that he translates more to the NFL at. And it'll be interesting to see whether Georgia wants to use him as a left tackle again, or they want to bring him inside to his more natural position of guard. I would guess that they are going to do that. But, with the challenge of the Clemson defensive line that's awaiting, in week one, you may not want to be breaking in a brand new left tackle out there. Outside of Salyer, you've got Justin Shaffer, who returns, using his COVID year of eligibility, returns after his senior season. He's got 2 years of starting experience. Started most games at left guard. Like I said, when Salyer bumped into left guard, he bumped over to right guard to replace Ben Cleveland in that bowl game. Will be interesting to see. I think his position kind of depends on where they put Salyer. If they're going to put Salyer at left guard, then Shaffer probably has the spot at right guard. But there's definitely some guys, in that room that could give him a push there. At center, replacing Trey Hill, Warren Erickson would be a great option. He could also factor in at guard. He has some experience there. And then Cedric Van Pran would be the other one at center. He was a true freshman this past season, one of the top-rated offensive linemen in that 2020 signing class, and could really factor in. And then looking at the tackles, Warren McClendon did not start the first game of the season. Kind of like Stetson Bennett. He came in midway through that Arkansas game with Georgia struggling and really provided a solid presence on that right side that helped the Bulldogs, come back and win that game. He earned SEC. He was a redshirt freshman this past season and earned, plenty of accolades as a freshman All-American, all SEC freshman team at right tackle. I would guess Georgia probably sticks with him there rather than moving him over to left tackle, just to have some sort of continuity on the line. When you're moving all these guys around from, left tackle inside to left guard over to right guard, replacing your center entirely, you want to have some continuity at the tackle positions. And Warren McClendon offers that at right tackle. Looking at left tackle, that's the position that's more open, especially if Salyer bumps inside. True freshman Amarius Mims could factor in there, as well as Broderick Jones, who was a freshman this past season. He got a little bit of experience, but not a ton. And then Xavier Truss, he started the bowl game at left tackle. Didn't have a great day, but with a full off season of work, and preparation, he could be an option there. I think Mims is the interesting option to Georgia fans, considering he was one of the top offensive linemen in this past signing class. Was actually Georgia's highest rated signee, number 7 overall in the country, number 3 at his position, and number 1 in the Peach State. 6'7", 315. He's a mammoth of a human being and certainly could earn himself some early playing time.
Yeah, Amarius Mims at the top of the board, man, he looks the part, no question about that, and he's graded out as near the very best at offensive tackle. And you mentioned Micah Morris as well is on campus when they start spring practice at 6'4", 316, number 9 at his offensive tackle position as well. And they've got one of the top guards in the country, although he's not coming in until the summer, in Dylan Fairchild. Palmer Tom's on the line, Dogs 247 Sports, breaking down the Bulldogs.